bookworms. Admin LJ here, aka Admin Lauren. Apologies for the delayed start. It is the middle of Mercury retrograde. If you know, you know. We had some tech issues, but it's all good now. So we are here. We're going to get started in just a minute, but thank you for your patience. I am so excited to do another one of our really fun live chats, live Q&As. I love getting to host these every month. As always, I really hope that you guys enjoy them too. Please come join, be part of the conversation down in that comment section. Myself, my fellow coworker, admin, Kate, will be joining you in the comment section. We're going to be hanging out. So be a part of the conversation. If you have questions you want to ask, please drop them there. If you have responses to our questions and our conversation, please, join in. As always, if you leave a question during our live broadcast, you will be entered to win a flash giveaway. I'm really excited to share that this time around, our flash giveaway prize is a signed copy of The Woman at the Castello, in the Castello. I do that every time. I'm so sorry. You will get a signed copy of The Woman in the Castello and maybe a little extra something. You never know. So make sure you leave a question down in the comment section during our live broadcast if you want a chance to win. I am really looking forward to this chat. For some reason, we keep falling into reading these books that have a scary element to them. And as you guys know, I am not a scary horror fan. So it's always a very interesting time for me personally. I sleep with the lights on quite a bit. Luckily, this one wasn't quite as scary as some of them have been in the past. I did have a few moments where I thought to myself, I think I could put up with this situation if it meant I was living in Italy. Like I think I could do it. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. But that's enough for me. Please come join us in the comment section. And I'm going to bring in our special guest, which is, of course, author Kelsey James, author of The Woman in the Castello. So please help me welcome her to our book club. Hi, Kelsey. Thank you so much for joining the Between the Chapters book club.
Of course, I'm so excited to be here and to get to chat with everyone.
I have been really looking forward to this. Like I said at the start of the little chat window there, I really am not a scary movie fan. I'm not a scary story fan in general, but I have found myself recently watching a lot more scary content. So I felt like this was a really good time to be talking about this book. But before we get too far into it, I would love to have you introduce yourself to any readers who may not be familiar with you, and of course, tell readers just a little bit about The Woman in the Castello if they haven't gotten a chance to read it yet.
Absolutely. So I'm Kelsey James, and this is my debut novel. So my first time doing this. So it's really thrilling for me to get to share it with all of you. And it tells the story of a young American starlet in who gets cast in a horror movie that starts to seem too real. It's set in Italy during the Hollywood on the Tiber era. So that's the 1960s, when spaghetti westerns were getting filmed, but also these movies called giallos, which were like this type of Italian thriller that was quite scary. And when the heroine Sylvia first arrives in Rome with her ailing mother and her 2-year-old daughter for what she thinks is going to be her big break, she finds out that the movie's canceled and she's in really desperate circumstances and doesn't have any money. And so she seeks out her mother's estranged sister who lives in a crumbling castello by an eerie volcanic lake. As luck would have it, it ends up being the shooting location for a horror movie, and she snags the starring role. But then her aunt disappears right after filming starts, and no one really seems to be worried about her disappearance except for Sylvia. And it becomes clear that someone is sabotaging Sylvia's performance. And if she can't find out what's really going on, she might actually be in danger. So it's a fun, romantic, campy, suspenseful book. So I think it's really great for a beach read, but it also does explore some themes that are like good for book club fodder, like, the challenges and dangers that women face when they step outside of sort of society's expectations of them. Sylvia is an unwed single mother in the 1960s. All of the characters in this book are really independent, strong women. And it also explores just how far we're willing to go for our families and what family really means.
I love that description. I also love that you call it very campy because it is very campy. And I think that's what I loved so much about it. Despite, there were a couple of moments where I was like, oh, if this were a movie right now, I would be under a blanket crying somewhere in a corner. But the campy element really, really helped for a scaredy cat like me. Um, but I really loved like you said, the characters themselves were very much, kind of pushing against the mold, kind of, stepping out of that comfort level. And maybe it's just because I did travel when I was younger and I did get a chance to go to Italy, but I was just struck by the fact that Sylvia is just in Italy, just traveling abroad on her own for a large chunk of time. And it is one of those situations where you think, okay, in the 1960s, a woman traveling like this in this kind of location, it just was kind of, I don't know, it took me a moment to be like, oh, okay, she could do that. She's strong enough to do that. Like no one is really, there are some moments where it's like maybe it would help to have someone with you, but for the most part, she is very strong and very independent. So I'm curious, did you have a specific personality in mind when you crafted her? Was she inspired by anyone in particular, or is she just kind of, she reminded me a lot of what I wish I could be, a little bit stronger in nature, despite you know, some of her hesitancy. So I'm curious if she was inspired by anyone in particular, or if she was just there.
Yeah, no, it wasn't based on any specific person. I think there were definitely some things that inspired her circumstances. So I started writing this book sort of at the end of 2019 or early 2020, when the world was really in chaos, and I was personally like having a lot of anxiety of, well, we all were, but I was definitely
Right.
having a lot of anxiety, but at work in particular, like things were kind of not going well. I like kind of see the writing on the wall a little bit. And so I think that really crept into the story as I was writing it. Because Sylvia, this isn't a spoiler. I hate spoilers. I'm going to try really hard not to spoil anything.
Yes, I will say we're going to try our best to not spoil it. So I'm going to be very vague on some of this
Uh,
stuff.
but in the very first chapter, so I don't think it's a spoiler, she loses her job on the movie that she had
Mhm.
arrived to Rome to film. And true story, the exact same day that I turned this manuscript into my agent, I was laid off from my job.
Oh,
And I was like, oh my, did I manifest this? Like, what did I do?
right.
So, but I definitely think that, the economic anxiety Sylvia is
Mhm.
experiencing is really a driving force for almost all of her decisions throughout the book. Taking care of her family
Mhm.
is really what motivates her. And so I think that really shaped her strength and her character is, she had to be there to show up for her family. And she didn't feel like she had a choice. And so, she came to Italy, this huge daring move, as you were talking about, as a young unwed single mother without much of a support system. She didn't really have a choice, and she kind of
Mhm.
just had to figure it out. And this was her chance to really make money for her family, and this is the way that she saw to do that.
Mhm.
But one thing that's different than her aunt, which we can talk about a little bit later, is like I think the theme of duty and personal desire is something that I really explore in this book. And for
Mhm.
Sylvia, for most of the book, I would say those are pretty neatly aligned. It's like she gets to take care of her family, and oh yeah, also it might help her become famous, which hey, that's
Right.
really great too. But in the case of her aunt, who had also been an actress, those things were in very stark contrast to each other. Her
Mhm.
aunt had to basically abandon her family in pursuit of fame. So
Mhm.
I thought that made an interesting foil.
Absolutely. And I did want to comment, especially since you brought up the aunt in comparison to Sylvia. Um, one of the things that always strikes me, especially with books where there is a woman as the protagonist who is going on these types of, I don't want to say adventures, but that's kind of the best journey. Let's go with journey. Um, I, as an oldest daughter in a family who had to step into the role of caretaking and looking after everyone else and supporting the family, I'm always struck by those characters, by the ones who, like you said, she has to have a very single-minded focus. And, especially as a mother herself, it is that drive. And so I do find it very interesting to see that comparison point against her aunt, who, a little bit different generation, a little bit different mindset of, I'm not going to do that. I'm not sacrificing for that,
Mhm.
which I thought was very interesting. But sorry, you were going to say something. I don't want to cut you off.
No, well, I was just going to say, and I also, so Sylvia's bombshell co-star
Mhm.
Lucrezia, she's like this kind of Sophia Loren type,
Yeah.
very va-va-voom, and
Yes.
she's very ambitious, but
Hmm.
it's not problematic, and I thought that was like important to have in there. Like Gabriella had to really make some questionable choices to
Hmm.
pursue her fame, and Lucrezia is not interested in necessarily like motherhood either, and there's nothing wrong with that. She's very unapologetic about her pursuit of fame, but it's
Right.
not really morally gray in any way. And
Hmm.
so it's sort of like, when does that pursuit become a problem, is something
Yeah.
that I wanted this book to explore a little bit.
Absolutely. And I do love that we do get those different variations in there of, like you said, some of the characters, they are mothers, they want to be mothers, and then some of them, no, I just want to be a star. I just want, the fame and the fortune and to be in this movie. And I think that's also very refreshing. Because again, we don't usually get to see that with strong women in any type of media. We have some reader questions coming in. Before we jump to those, I have one question that I really wanted to make sure I asked at the top of the chat, because I was going through the materials that your lovely publicist had put together of some conversation points that you guys had had, and I was struck by, I believe you had written in one of your letters that you find that the horror genre and the thriller genre and these like scarier genres are really a great tool to process big emotions, big life events. And I was really struck by that. And I would love to just have a chance to chat with you about what that means for you. I know you said that part of this book did come from a very tumultuous time. So what is it about this horror genre that helps process those big moments?
Yeah, I think you really can look at reality through the prism of unreality. When there's these things like maybe there's a ghost, it doesn't feel real. So we're able to like process these things that feel scary for us in a way that feels kind
Mhm.
of distanced from our actual lives. And that kind of gives us a sense of catharsis where we can deal with things without necessarily like looking at them head on. And horror movies have always been a way for us to process societal fears. And
Mhm.
then, going back to our conversation about independent women in the 1960s, a very big societal fear was the rise of the empowered independent women and the destruction of the nuclear family.
Mhm.
And so I really loved that Sylvia is a manifestation of that fear. So the movie that's being filmed within the book, the plot is sort of, this vampire witch is trying to tempt the characters that Sylvia is playing is named Bianca. She's trying to tempt her, and she kind of represents carnal desire and sin. And the heroine is supposed to resist her and end up, with the male lead and having this nice
Mhm.
white wedding at the end. But Sylvia, in her real life, is an unwed single mother, and she thinks this is really simplistic. I don't like this. I want to
Right.
complicate this. And so she's really resisting the director's vision that's being presented. But this was, I mean, you think any monster movie, the woman getting
Mhm.
kidnapped and the hero saves her, it's actually really about kind of reclaiming the patriarchy. And so
Mhm.
it's just interesting that in this time period that was a theme that was being explored. Um, and I also want to say that it was just a fun way to play with what's real and what's fake. I mean, it's a characteristic of Gothic fiction. So
Mhm.
it's sort of like, is this part of the set or is this real blood? Is
Right.
my character being haunted? The character is being haunted by a ghost of the witch. Is the actress actually being haunted? in the castle. So it just
Right.
created some really fun contrasts as well.
Yes, and having, like I said, having visited some European locations, having visited some locations in Italy, I can very easily see why she would wander a corridor and think, maybe I'm not alone like I think I am. It's very much a feeling over there. Um, I do also, I'm just going to shout out one of my favorite movies just because your explanation of that really brought it to the forefront. If anyone has not watched it, Ready or Not is one of my favorite scary movies, but it's very funny also. But I won't spoil the ending of it, but there was one portion of your answer that made me think, oh, that's exactly what that movie was and what that movie did. And it's one of my favorites. I rewatch it all the time, despite the fact that I'm a huge chicken, as I will continue to point out. Um, all right, so we do have some reader questions coming in, so I'm going to jump over to those. Guys, keep them coming in. I see the conversations happening. I love it. Please, keep chatting with us. Uh, this reader is curious, what was the most interesting part of writing this book or writing this story?
Most interesting part. I mean, I think because a lot of the characters are kind of over the top, like which is because I'm writing this this horror movie
Mhm.
where things are a little bit over the top. I felt like it was only fitting that some of the characters themselves also needed to be, and I think like the male co-star Terrence Leopold is not a super nice guy. The
Mhm.
aunt is really eccentric. The female co-star Lucrezia, as mentioned, is she's also like very strong personality. I think it was really fun to just kind of like have free reign, like when people
Mhm.
characters that say really outrageous things, that's always just kind of fun to like unleash that a little bit.
To say I always love what I call an unhinged character. And I don't mean that in like a negative way. I think people hear unhinged are like, oh, that's so negative. No, I love a spunky character that is maybe probably a little bit problematic in some area. But I always love it. Um, let's see. I'm just scrolling through all the different questions to make sure I get a nice variety going. Oh, I do love this one. Which character was easier for you to write, Sylvia or Gabriella?
Oh, that's interesting. I would say Gabriella. I don't know, just
Mhm.
because she was so like eccentric and over the top, it was
Right.
like those words just kind of like it was just so easy to envision for some reason.
Mhm.
So I would say Gabriella.
I do. I could see how she would be a lot of fun to write. 'Cause Sylvia, Sylvia has a lot of responsibilities. She kind of had to like keep control, and then also the whole "Am I crazy? Am I not?" situation. Um, Going back to kind of your process as you were writing, this reader is curious. Did you get to visit any locations in Europe while you were preparing to write? Have you gotten to visit any specific locations?
So great question. I was planning to do. I'd been to Italy multiple times before this
Right.
book, and was planning to go back to do a little more dedicated research. But I did write this book in 2020, as I
Mhm.
mentioned,
Mhm.
so that sort of curtailed my plans. But I did spend my first trip to Italy was definitely really a formative one for me. I was in college. I was there for 3 months.
Mhm.
And the program I was doing with my university, we traveled all over the country with like a dozen students and a professor, and we went to all the
Right.
museums and archaeological sites, and it was just like for someone who loves travel and history, like absolute heaven.
Yeah.
And it made a big impression on me because I ended up going into travel as a career for a while. I was a travel writer and editor after college. And so I was very fortunate. I've been to many palaces and castles. I kind of have a thing for them all over the world. And so definitely like really fun. This is a fictional castle, but there are actual castles outside of Rome that served as inspiration and that also were real filming locations for horror movies in this time
Mhm.
period. Castle of the Living Dead in 1964 was filmed in a month, at a castle about 40 minutes outside of Rome. So this is actually, even though it sounds like kind of a fantastical setup, it was actually very plausible. Like this really
Right.
happened. So, and like, what a cool setting to get to play with.
Absolutely. I do have to ask because, like I mentioned, I also got to travel in Italy when I was in college. Hands down, best experience. I was very fortunate. But I'm curious, what was your favorite location in Italy that you got to travel, or favorite town, city?
I love Rome. I probably spent the
Mhm.
most time in Rome. I mean, we went all over. There's a lot of I love so many places in Italy, but Rome, I think, as a history lover, just has
Right.
a special place in my heart.
It is hard to beat that one. All right. Awesome. I love this question. Okay. So, did you ever have to change any of the names of your characters because the personality didn't fit anymore?
Well, I have a great answer about this, but it's not because the personality didn't fit. The name of the daughter, Sylvia's 2-year-old daughter, was originally Cecilia, CC for
Mhm.
short. About halfway into writing this book, I got pregnant. I had my baby. I had no idea this book would ever sell, like see the light of day. And I was like, I spent so much time with this name. I really love it. I'm going to use it for my actual real life daughter, which I guess this is a very unique writer problem. So I did. And then the book did sell. And I
Mhm.
was doing, working with my editor. And I had this moment where I realized I can't leave this name in here. This is my daughter's name. So I had to rename Cecilia as Lucy, Lulu for short, which I
Right.
actually love better for her character anyway.
I mean, it's super adorable, but I do love that that's the reason you had to change the name. Definitely not an answer we've ever had before in the book club. I love that.
I didn't know how she would feel about it when she was a teenager. I thought she might not be thrilled. So,
Right. No,
kind of
that's a very fair assessment, fair question. As someone with a name that is in literally 1,001 places, I commend you for making the change. Um, all right, I just this might be a tough question. I don't know if well, I think I could answer it. I just don't know the name of it. But which castle is your favorite in the world?
man, that is
That's
really
a
hard.
big question.
I mean, Alhambra in Spain is really cool. Uh, Topkapi Palace in Istanbul is really amazing. There's so many.
Yeah, that's such a hard question.
I reviewed a lot of hotels, and there are a lot of castle hotels. Ashford Castle in Ireland was like an incredible property. Oh, I like literally could just like go on vacation to castles for that. That would be like my dream. I've done a lot of that.
Yeah, like I think I love to visit a castle and I love to walk through a castle, but the moment you said like there are hotels in castles or you could stay in, immediately my scaredy cat brain went, absolutely not. I will never, you could not pay me enough to do it. Can't. That's how they get you. I'm not falling for that trap. But that does remind me, one of the readers earlier in the conversation did ask, do you believe in or have you ever seen a ghost?
I have never seen a ghost.
Mhm.
I don't know that I believe in them. I think I'm just like very agnostic in general, where I'm sort of just the type that will say, I don't know what I don't know.
Right.
But no, I haven't really. I have been to actually, speaking of castles, I was at Chateau Chillon in Switzerland, which
Mm.
had like a very like scary basement situation,
Right.
torture chamber kind of deal. There are places that do feel like they have a presence, I will say,
Mhm.
where it's like I'm creeped out. I don't really, and it's not, there's something about this place that's just a
Right.
little extra.
Yes, I do. I think the book club knows, again, because I'm a scaredy cat. I do believe in maybe not ghosts, like physical manifestations, but there are things, and I don't need to know more about them. If I don't ask questions, then I don't get haunted, and that's my only goal in life. Um, let's see. I do want to circle back because you've mentioned a couple of times, and I've loved doing author chats this last 6, 8 months in particular because almost every author has had the same response of Well, I didn't get to do on location research because I wrote it in 2020. And I think it's a really interesting insight into how long the process actually takes to plan and write and research a book. I think a lot of times, I definitely did before I started in publishing. I used to think, well, I can't, like, you just whip it out, you just write a book. And, now on the other side, I'm like, I'm so sorry I ever thought that. But I'm curious, what was the length of time that you worked on this book? Were you working on it for years, or was it really just that concentration in 2020?
The first draft I actually wrote pretty quickly. It kind of just like it was like one of those things where it just doesn't always happen this way with writing, but it just kind of
Mhm.
poured out of me. I think I wrote the first draft in like 6 months. But what took time was the revision process, going on submission, selling it, that whole
Mhm.
journey takes just publishing takes a while. And I also had another book. Basically, my agent in 2020, I had written another book as well that we were still working on revisions. And she's like, we're not going on submission this year. Like, world's crazy. Like, we're going to take a little while to work on the revisions. And so we worked on the revisions for both books, for The Woman in the Castello and another book, which was actually the one that she had signed me for originally, which is coming out next summer. Um,
Mhm.
and and so we kind of just took our time with those revisions over like maybe the course of the next year or so. Um, and like really whipped them into shape. And then luckily my editor at Kensington was into it. And so now here we are.
Yes, and I will say not only was your editor, our editor-in-chief, John Scognamilia, into it, he was like such an enthusiastic cheerleader. I remember him actually sending me the first like back read on the manuscript. I was like, John, I don't do scary things. He's like, but you've got to read this one. So I was the barometer for whether or not it was too scary. It wasn't, thankfully we got through it. But I distinctly remember him talking about this book. So I'm glad that the process did what it did.
And
But
it's so like,
speaking,
oh, just
sorry,
you
go ahead.
I was just say you talking about it not being too scary. I think I agree, and I think this book is interesting. It's kind of a blend of genres. Like I would say,
Mhm.
like it's gothic fiction, it's historical suspense, it's women's fiction, it's romance. It's kind of all of those things married together, just because those are all of the things I like to read. Um,
Mhm.
and I hadn't really like there are other authors doing that particular blend, but not that many. And it
Right.
was pointed out to me that this was a really big tradition in like the second half of the 20th century, with authors like Victoria Holt and Phyllis Whitney and BC Andrews
Mhm.
were doing this type of romantic suspense, which
Mhm.
I think I am embarrassed to say I hadn't been familiar with those authors beforehand, and now I'm remedying that. I'm like very flattered by the comparison, but I think it's really kind of a renaissance of that particular type of book where it's not, I do think some people come in thinking this is horror, and it's not. It's
Right.
historical suspense with the gothic romantic twist.
Right. It's just enough of the horror that, if you're super easily influenced, I
Oh, looks like we lost Lauren. So we'll just hang tight for I know she said it only takes her about a minute to get back when this happens. So I can look at some of these questions in the meantime. um let's see if I can see the questions. So I see one that says, "Do you like to watch scary movies?" Um Great question. I will say that I'm more into suspense than I am into horror, although oh, there's Lauren.
So sorry. I get spam phone calls like around the clock. And even though I keep setting my phone to do not disturb, do not give me notifications, I still get the phone calls. So sorry about
No
that.
worries. I was asking myself a question in the meantime.
Perfect. Go for it. What was the question?
Well, it was from the chat. Someone said, "Do you like to watch scary movies?" And I was saying that I actually prefer suspense, like for my personal preference, but I did research some horror movies for this book. I would say there's a 1960 Italian horror movie called Black Sunday that served as inspiration for the movie being filmed in the book. The movie within the book is called The Revenge of the Lake Witch. And it's very much in this same type of vein. They're kind of funny to watch. They're like a little bit like they don't quite hold up to 21st century film production standards, but they're really interesting from like a film studies perspective. Um, and then also I mentioned Castle of the Living Dead was another one from this time period that was like filmed on location in a castle. I think my personal like suspense movies that I like I'm definitely a Hitchcock fan. Um, I loved Dial M for Murder. I loved Rear Window. Another one I love with Audrey Hepburn is Wait Until Dark, which is fantastic, fantastic movie. I saw it in a movies in the park setting in New York City, and people were losing their minds. They were so scared. And it's really interesting because I've seen other movies like The Shining in a park, and people were laughing. And there's something about this kind of subtle psychological suspense that's actually, when you're in a group setting like that, proves to be much scarier, which I found really interesting. Um, Another thing I like about those movies is they're actually all kind of set almost entirely in one location. So you really have to and a couple like I think Dial M for Murder was adapted from a stage play, so that's like part of the reason for that. But it allows the settings to really be characters in and of themselves, which I think is really fun, and become significant figures in the plot, which I think in my book I really did want the castle and the town of Castello del Lago to be a character in and of itself.
Right.
And then everything else kind of has to, hold your attention. It's not about like these change of sceneries and changes of location. It's about what's going on with the characters and the plot and the twists.
I will be totally honest. I've seen zero of the movies you just listed or discussed. I think I've seen part of, well, you mentioned Hitchcock. I've seen like half of The Birds, but that's it of that entire list that you just shared.
Well, The Birds was interesting inspiration for another reason, which is Alfred Hitchcock was very not nice to the star of that movie. And one thing that we see Sylvia encounters is her male co-star and the director both are kind of bullies in different ways. And so she has to, which there's a very long tradition of more powerful men in Hollywood not being nice to these, young actresses in more vulnerable positions. And so that's definitely a storyline that's present in this book as well, and how she navigates that. And part of also being a woman who's kind of pushing against, societal conventions. Within the movie being filmed, that puts the character in danger. And then also in Sylvia's real life, that could put her in danger.
Right. I do want to, before I had a spam phone call, I wanted to loop around because you had mentioned your next book comes out next summer, and we did have a reader who was asking about your next book. So it's always a little tricky. I'm never fully sure how much our authors at this stage are able and allowed to say. So I welcome you to say whatever you are allowed to say that won't get you and me in trouble with your agent and editor.
Well, no one has told me I can't say anything.
That's always
I think it's fine.
Like, no one told me I couldn't.
So I think it's fine. It's called Secrets of Rosebriar Hall. It's set in 1908 Gold Coast, Long Island. And it tells the story of a wealthy heiress who throws an extravagant dinner party in her new mansion, and then wakes up and can't remember anything that happened about that night. And has to unravel the events that unfolded, or she might be in very real danger.
And I think I know the answer to this question, but the reader is also curious, will it continue this blend of Gothic historical suspense era that you've got going? Perfect.
Yes.
I do love the idea of like Gold Coast, Long Island. I don't think I've really read many books set in that location, so it's kind of exciting for me. We'll see if I'm brave enough to read that one after reading this one. But again, not as scary as I went in thinking, so we're okay. Now my dog's gonna start barking. So we're doing great during this Mercury retrograde season. All right, I'm just trying to see. I believe I saw this question. So, yes, here it is. It's a little variation of a question I always love to ask anyway, so I wanted to make sure I got it correct. But if you could choose to be one of the characters in this book, who would you want to be and why would you want to be them?
Oh man.
Yeah, it's always a very tricky one.
If I could be one of the characters in this book. I mean, I would say I probably identify most with Sylvia just because I was like writing my own anxieties about motherhood and providing and all of those things into her. So I guess that's probably the easiest answer, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's a couple that would be interesting, but I guess I would have to say the heroine because
It's just it's always a hard question. I will say the version that I always ask, I'm going to throw it at you anyways, just to see if it's a different answer. But the one I always love to ask is if you could spend a day with a character and you can do anything you want, you can go into their world, bring them into our world. What character do you want to spend a day with?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I think Gabriella or Lucrezia would both be very interesting. I think they just seem like very interesting women who would have a lot of stories to tell and a lot of life experiences that I would be interested to hear about.
Perfect. I'm trying to type, read, and talk all at the same time. Fixed in headphones. It's fine. It's a Monday, and everyone is doing great. Okay, this reader is curious. Do you have a favorite? You mentioned like, especially because this book is very much a blend of the different genres. Do you have a favorite genre? Of all of those blends that you do love, that you gravitate towards reading, and maybe was there one part of the genre meld that you had that you really loved to write?
That's so hard. I mean, I love all of them. I would say, it's my favorite. I'll tell you like examples of ones I like in all of them. Can I do that?
I know it's always so mean that myself and the readers like pick a favorite, and you can't pick favorites.
I would say for straight historical fiction, I love Kristen Hanna. I think The Four Winds was just an incredibly powerful book. For kind of romantic and like slightly spicy historical fiction, I love Beatrice Williams. She did like The Summer Wives, 100 Summers, the Schuyler sister novels. For suspense, I'm a big Ruth Ware fan. She did The Woman in Cabin 10, The Death of Mrs. Westaway. And for gothic, I would say like Kate Morton and Wendy Webb, I think are both incredible. And I also really enjoyed The Hacienda by Isabel Cañas. And I also recently read Her Little Flowers by fellow Kensington author Shannon Morgan, and thought that was fabulous. It's set in an English manor with lots of ghosts. Might be too scary for you, Lauren, but it's really fun.
Sadly, it wasn't a little. It was a lot too scary for me. But I did read it because I had to work on that one. That one definitely had the lights on for a night or two after reading that one, but it was very good. I was trying to have the book hidden behind the stacks of other books. I was going to pull it out, show off the cover, but it would be more chaos than anything else. Let's see. I'm trying to make sure I get to everyone's questions here, so bear with me. And we still have a little bit of time, so if you have any more questions, make sure you throw them in there. I love this. Let's go back to crafting and your process when writing the book. This reader says, there are multiple twists within the book, and there are reveals and secrets and clues being left behind. So did that evolve through the process as you wrote the book, or did you have to plan it out in advance?
That's a fun question. I describe myself as a connect the dots reader. So in the writing community, people talk a lot about plotters, where you know the whole plot structured like very clearly, and then pantsers, who are writers who write by the seat of their pants. And I am sort of in between, what I call a connect the dots writer, which I didn't invent that term. I think it was V.E. Schwab, who's a fabulous, very prolific writer. And it's sort of like I know the big milestones and I'm writing toward those, and they kind of give me momentum. So I knew the end before I started the book, and that was like it was sort of like getting to that was fun for me. So that was part of the so the twists were, I'm sure there were like little ones along the way that like I do some discovery through writing, and so I probably did come up with some in the process, but the big ones I knew.
I love that. All right. I will say I'm going to ask this next reader question, and then I'm going to slide out of frame for a second, because I have been notified by some readers that my headphones are sounding a little funky on the audio. I am so sorry. That dang phone call really just messed up my equipment. So I'm going to ask this question, then I'm just going to kind of magically slide away for a moment. This reader is curious, would you ever consider writing a book that is a little bit more mystery or thriller leaning in the future?
Absolutely. I love, kind of straight suspense books. Right now I'm like really enjoying kind of the vein that I'm in. But I actually would say my second book coming out next summer, I would say is a little more of a thriller than a mystery. And so like, I guess I already have. But I like what I do more like traditional, like contemporary suspense or contemporary thriller. Absolutely. I feel like as writers, like we're always learning and growing and developing our craft and trying new things. And so, I hope that I'm lucky enough to have a very long career where there's room for me to try a lot of things.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you described the next book, and hopefully these headphones are working better. They're not my best pair, but they're the closest ones I had. When you were describing your next book, it did definitely sound a little bit more thriller adventure, and I am so sorry that this is still very staticky, apparently. So sorry, readers. I'm doing my best here. Hopefully it's not too bad. Readers, please let me know if the audio is too rough. Give my co-admin in the comments a shout, and I may have her switch places with me and get on camera for me. So just give me a heads up. But I was going to say the description of the next book does definitely lend itself, it sounds like, to more of a thriller mystery novel. It reminded me almost a little bit of, well, again, because I have a childish brain, it reminded me a little bit of like Clue or Knives Out, that mystery component of, I don't know what's happening, but something weird is happening. Obviously, your book is not going to be quite as lighthearted as those references are, but again, that's what my scaredy cat brain knows.
Yeah, I love those comparisons, and I think those are fun. Like, I also would say both of this book and the book coming out next summer are house books, where there's really there's the Castello is like a character in and of itself. And then in Secrets of Rosebriar Hall is also a really important part of the story. And so, you mentioned Knives Out, it's kind of the same thing. Like you have these really like kind of creepy houses that form a backdrop and play an important role in their own right.
Yes, sorry, I was listening. I'm trying to do some audio tech situations here. So I am going to switch places with my co-admin. She's going to hop on and finish out this chat for you guys. I'm going to hop on the back end, so I will be joining everyone in the comments section. Kelsey, thank you for sticking with me during this little chaos situation.
Good.
but I'm going to bring my co-admin on and she's going to finish out the chat. So everyone, please give admin KJ a nice warm welcome and send in those last questions before the end of our hour.
Hey everyone, sorry, you might see it's a little dark behind me, but yes. Hi, Kelsey. It's good to see you again.
Hi.
Hi. So I was doing multiple things as well on the back end. So I'm going to jump over to some reader questions. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
Perfect. We'll go through some of them. We got some really great questions. I was also thinking about the scary movies, and I was like, and when you were talking about Gothic books, I was like, I also loved The Hacienda.
So good.
I got her new book and I'm like ready to read it. So I'm so excited. So some of the reader questions. Let's go. Do you have a favorite? Oh, well, this is what we were kind of talking about. You didn't get a chance to research, but so move on from that one. And then, sorry, let me go through all of them. We got so many good questions. Someone was curious. You did weave so much of the history of Italy into your book. Did you speak to anyone from that time period for research for the book? And then maybe kind of what is how did you dive into that history part of the book?
Yeah, that's a fun question. So actually, we did have a family friend who grew up in Italy and was in Rome in the 1960s. And like something that he had talked about was there being political brawls on the streets as just like commonplace in this time period. And that was a detail that made it into the book. And I think that sort of fraught political landscape was also really important in a part of the inspiration for this story. Like I was definitely thinking about what was our own political landscape and how I think people not really understanding each other or seeing eye to eye. And so I was drawn to post-war Italy, where Italy during World War II changed sides during the war, and you had families, you had neighbors who ended up on different sides of this conflict. And so in the 1960s, Italy was experiencing this economic boom, American tourism, Hollywood is descending, but there's actually these really real scars that were still lingering in the country. There were still, buildings with bullet holes on them. Cleopatra was this enormous movie production that was being filmed in the early 1960s. And like this beach scene, they had to clear mines from the beach from when the Allied troops had landed. And like some workers died because of the mines that were still on the beach. So it was like these things were just really confronting each other in a really fascinating way. And I started to think about, from a domestic perspective, what would it look like if these two sisters, so Sylvia's mother and her estranged sister, had to reunite after all these years apart and face what would that look like? And is there room for forgiveness? Is there room for redemption? And so that was definitely a big part of the inspiration here. And reading books and memoirs about this time period. So like I mentioned Cleopatra, there was a memoir I read called My Life with Cleopatra, written by the producer of the movie about filming. It was the most expensive movie ever made, and it was just this huge paparazzi phenomenon. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton having this highly publicized affair. It was the genesis of the paparazzi era. And so that was like a really great resource because I was writing about movie making during this time period. So that was really helpful as well. And also there, like, I mentioned at the beginning of the chat, I studied ancient history in college. And so researching the 1960s was so much fun because, you could read books from people who were there. You could talk to people who were there. Watch movies that were made during that time period. I mean, it's just so many rich resources to draw from.
Yeah, and that's great that you had, that you had the opportunity to do all of that. And I did not know that about the movie Cleopatra, which I have not actually seen. I should watch it, but that would be terrifying to just but it's so interesting. Like, it is very fascinating how those two, like the history and Hollywood world, collided. I think let's go through some of the questions. Oh no, that's not that. That one was still the question. Well, yes. Do you have a favorite place you want to travel or set your books in?
Oh, that I want to travel or set my books in. I mean, So setting is really often a big part of the first spark of inspiration for me. And so
Mhm.
I definitely, when I'm thinking about a new story, I do kind of cast my mind around to places that I've traveled. I would love to write something in Greece or Turkey at some
Mhm.
point, or Central America, like Belize or Costa Rica would be these are all places that I've been that I think would just be really cool settings. Um, I've not been to Egypt. I would love to go to Egypt.
I was just thinking Egypt in my mind.
It's definitely, but I have little kids, so it might be a few years before I make it to Egypt, but it's on the list
Yeah,
eventually.
that's one of my dream locations. I love like it just I feel like it's one of those places you visit and you just can't comprehend what you're seeing. It's like I feel like seeing the yeah, I think the pyramids would be amazing. So, if you ever get to go, I'd be very excited to read the book based on that location. So,
Fingers crossed that's in the future.
yes. And then let's go. There's some more questions. What is one history rabbit? Oh, I always love this because I find that I do this. And then I love research as well. And so, what is one history research rabbit hole that you've found yourself falling into? It's so, I feel like it's just like that Wikipedia thing where you're just like you keep diving. There's so much to find out.
Um, I mean, as a historical fiction writer, it's like literally it happens constantly. Like I don't know that I have like one example. It's like I get caught up, like I'll be like really flowing with the writing and the story, and then I like get caught up on a detail. And like I'm writing my third book right now, and I literally spent 45 minutes last night researching like the layout of kitchens and silverware drawers in the 1920s and 30s. Like not interesting. I fell asleep. It was not interesting. But like, this happens all of the time because you like want to get these little things right, to make sure that the time period is credible. But yeah, I mean, definitely with the 1960s. I will say I read a lot about Italian politics, and Italian politics are incredibly complicated. Please don't ask me to like summarize.
I won't. Don't worry, because I would not.
But
I
like,
feel like
so
I
like
could
like absolutely like post-war Italy, and honestly even into the present, like I definitely went down a rabbit hole with that, and I tried to really like kind of stick to the essentials for the story rather than and that's another thing you have to do as a historical fiction writer, is sort of parse what you actually need to share and what's relevant for the story that you're trying to tell, because we also don't want to bog the reader down too much with minutia that aren't relevant, even though we as writers and researchers have to get bogged down with those quite often.
when you like, I feel like you probably become so fascinated by something. You're like, I want everyone else to learn about this as well. Which
Yes.
that kind of leads me into something I'm always curious about. Is there anything that you wanted to include in the book that, just for some reason or another, we're not able to, or?
Yeah, it's a good question. Nothing's coming to mind. I will say, like, there is the saying, like, "Kill your darlings," where I'm sure that happened. Where writers, you have to kind of let go of like these little details or subplots that you get really attached to, and if it just doesn't work, sometimes you have to get rid of them. I don't really remember killing too many darlings in this book. Luckily, I think like I tend to actually write a little bit short and then I go and like flesh things out. Um,
Mhm.
and so I'm lucky in that way. Like I have writer friends who write really, really long and they have to cut out like so many thousands of words that they're very attached to, and it's very painful for them. So I feel for
Yeah,
that.
that'd be so hard. I feel like I think that would be my hardest. Like, I just feel like, oh, but I'm so attached to this person, this topic, this moment. Like, oh, it'd be so hard to let go. Um, so to kind of close out the chat, are there any books you'd love to recommend? Anything you're reading now that you just like can't get enough of?
um, my to read pile right now is extremely long. I think one of the wonderful things about this whole journey is I've been able to meet so many incredible writers.
Mhm.
And so I'm really wanting to read their work and support them right now. One of the books I'm reading right now, I'm kind of jumping around between a few, but The Second Life of Muriel West is another Kensington author, Amanda Skenendor, who's lovely. I met her at the Historical Novel Society conference earlier this year, and I think she's just phenomenally talented. I'm completely blown away by her writing.
It's a great job. Yeah, I love that. It's such a fast. I learned so much from reading that book, and I was like, I knew so little when I started. So. But well, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, readers, for joining us with all your questions. They were amazing. And I did shout out some of the blog posts that you shared with us for touring around Italy and also some scary classic movies if you feel brave enough. So yeah, well, thank you again. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their evening.
Thank you all so much for joining me. It's been such a pleasure.
Bye, guys.